Thank you for joining me. I'm Deborah from Sewing with Dolls. Today we're going to be working on a pattern by Favorite Dress, and it's for Ruby Red, Little Darling, Paola Rennie, and other 13-inch dolls. I chose this dress because it has a few features that I thought would be interesting to new sewers. This pattern uses a 4mm stitch, so I'm sewing with my needle on the left, and this mark here, if you can see it, is my 4mm mark. Slip this back on. So I've sewn a 4mm seam along my collar. I've clipped it along the edges for the curve. This one I've already turned inside out, or right side out. And now I'm just going to give them a quick press. At this stage you could top stitch. The pattern tells you to top stitch, but I'm not going to do that because I'm not really fond of it. Next, we're going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches along the bottom and up here at the sleeve cap. I'm just going to take these over to the machine and be right back. I've done my gathering stitches on the top and the bottom. I've knotted the one side so that I know that after I finish my gathering and it's sewn on, I can just pull them to remove the gathering stitches. So now we're going to attach the cuffs. The pattern tells you to do it from the front. I prefer to do it from behind. And then fold that up and do my top stitching on the front so that I can see where it's going and it's not messy afterwards. So I'm going to fold my sleeve in half. Mark it with a pin. And mark the center of my cuff with a pin. So right side to wrong side, center's matched. Stick a pin in there to hold it, move the other one, and pull your gathering threads. And the other side. and spread them out to fit. And then do the same thing with the other sleeve. So we've got our sleeve cuff, attaching it, back stitch, and repeat with the other sleeve. So we've sewn that right side of the cuff towards the back side of the sleeve. Now we're just going to remove our gathering stitches. Be careful not to pull your top ones. So now we're going to take the cuff and turn it over about 1/4 of an inch and finger press it. You can press this with an iron if you prefer. And then turn it over to the front to cover your stitches. Pin it. Now you just want a top stitch to hold that down, and I use this part of my machine as a guide. So I'm going to keep this edge tight up there, and that'll give me a close seam. If your machine likes to suck everything down like mine, just give a little taunt pull onto your back strings. And that's what the back looks like. For the next step, the pattern shows us to leave the serged edge at the front and attach the lace to the front side. But I prefer to turn that edge over to the back, just personal choice. You can attach it right to the bottom, but I'm afraid of it unraveling and being messy. So here's the front side of my skirt. And now I'm just going to take my lace, pin it down, and do a small zigzag along this little line here. And I'll be back. Now we're on the center gather. So it says 5 centimeters from the bottom, but I don't usually measure in centimeters, and I know that I want it 1 3/4 inches from the bottom with a 1/4 inch and then my top line. So I'm just going to measure from the top down because it's easier to get my placement. So I'm going 2.5 inches down. Make sure your ruler doesn't slip. So that's going to be my top line, and then 1/4 inch down from there. And I'm going to go gather them and be back. From this part of the pattern, it doesn't give a whole lot of instruction as to what to do with this. It just says to lay 2 parallel stitches on the skirt in the desired location, gather the 2 laid threads, pull off the skirt part slightly. It doesn't tell us how much to gather or how long this piece of lace is. So I decided that I would go 18 inches, so 9 inches across on either side. So I've cut my ribbon here, my lace here at 18 inches. I've got my center mark, and I'm just going to pin that down. So that it's 9 inches on each side. Pin that. Give this a little gather. That's the right length. Just need to evenly spread these out. And then pin that down and sew on the top and the bottom. And once I get that done, I'll be back. Center lace is now sewn on. While I was at the machine, I finished off the edges of the short edge and folded them over 1/4 inch and sewed them down. And I also did the 2 rows of gathering stitches. So we'll put that aside for now and move on to the front of the dress. The bodice has details along the front, so we're just going to stitch them down like such on each side, and I'll be back once that's done. I've stitched that down on both sides, and I sewed the shoulder seams and finger pressed them open at the back. I did that on both the front and the lining. Now it's time to add the collar. So with our right sides facing, take our collar pieces and pin them on. I find this is easier to mark the center. Stick a couple of pins in there to hold it down. Make sure that stays on the center. Now I'm going to take this to the machine and sew just within 1/8, because I'm just more or less basting it down so that it'll stay in place when we put our lining down. Now that we have our collar stitched down, we can add our lining. So right sides together, and we're going to stitch here, along here, and down. Make sure they're lined up. I like to add pins right at the seam. Just to keep everything aligned. One in the center of the neck. One in the top corner here. And one in just a little bit from the start. And we turn it and do the same. And we'll take that over to the machine and sew it. So we're stitching 4 millimeters in. I did my back stitching. Another stitch. And finish with the empty back stitches. Now we're just going to clip around the curves so that it lays flat, being sure not to cut into your stitches. Clip the corner off on each side. And turn it around. Push these corners out. I use a chopstick for this. If you're having trouble getting the corner out, I just take my old seam ripper here. That's pretty blunt. And just gently pick the corner out. I'm just going to press. I don't know what this new ironing board of mine is made of, but it's sure noisy. Now to help keep that flat and the lining on the inside, we're just going to add a row of top stitching from this corner, from that corner to that corner. Now that our top stitching is done, we're going to attach our sleeves, and this is attached to both the lining and the front of the bodice at the same time. I've marked the center of my sleeve, and I'm going to match that up with my shoulder seam. Pin it through all layers. Get my gathering threads here. Match this up to the side and pin. And the same with the other side. Make sure you catch that lining. Now just pull your gathering threads, and so that all fits together nicely. Adjust your gathers to fit. And pin. So you're going to do that with both sleeves, and then stitch 4 millimeters in, and then finish off the raw edge with your choice of a serger. If you don't have a serger, you can use a zigzag. I'm going to do this and leave you to sew on your own because it's difficult to see with the camera, and I need to be able to see this. So I'll be back when it's all finished. Now that we have our sleeves finished, we're going to sew along the sleeve edge and down the side and finish that edge. And do that on both sides, and we'll be right back. So I've got my sides done, and my long end here for the sleeve, I'm just going to tuck it in with my crochet hook. You can use a needle. I'm just going to pull that through and trim the end. I should cut this off because it's going to be sewn to the skirt. And now our bodice is done. Now we're going to take our skirt, and I like to fold it in half, find the center, mark that, and then take each side from the center and bring it back into the center and mark my sides, and these will match up with the side seams. Just makes spreading your gathers out a little bit easier and more even. So I'm going to go gather and pin that, and I'll be back. Now that it's all gathered and pinned, it's ready to be sewn, and finish the edge here, and I'll be right back after I do that. So now that we have the skirt sewn on, we're just going to push that up. Get rid of this loose thread. We're going to push that up and top stitch it on the top, on the front. Now we're ready to add our Velcro. I usually don't use Velcro, I use sewing buttons, but it's getting late and I just want to get this finished. So with the Velcro, we're going to put the soft side on the doll's proper left and The rougher side is going to go on the outside of the proper right. I'm not going to pin it down because I find it gets all messed up. So we're going to go over to the machine now and sew that on. I cut this strip of Velcro about, oops, camera's in the way. About 3.5 inches long. And we're going to just back stitch that a bit to secure it. I actually ended up taking out the strip of loop tape because I couldn't see with the camera and it was seriously messed up. So I went ahead and did the other side without the camera. Sorry about that. So now our dress is almost complete. Last thing is to add a bow to the front. You can add a bow to either side. I'm not sure I want to do that this time. I'm just going to add the bow there. I'm just going to stitch that on by hand. Make sure I don't go all the way through. I put some fray stop on the ends. Still a little bit tacky. Do a French knot. And just run that between the front and the lining. Push it through. And cut it off. And our dress is done. And here is Sarah wearing her new dress. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next week.